Thank you for coming to view the Humanist 2020 Remembrance Ceremony. My name is Major Waddell, and in my capacity as the Defence Humanist Co-Chair, I will be leading today's ceremony with support from patrons of Humanists UK, members of the Ministry of Defence, Defence Humanists, and the London Humanist Choir. Firstly, let's begin by considering why we have remembrance. Remembrance is important because it provides us with the opportunity to remember our past, as it is our past that roots us in who we are and what is significant about our identity and our history. Remembrance, however, is not just about the past. It's also about the telling of a story, so it may become real and alive in the present and be effective in encouraging and directing the future. How we remember, who we are remembering, and what we remember will shape our future attitude and response to war, as well as all the non-military personnel who are also affected by it. This year, the Defence Humanists Network has designed the ceremony in a theme of diversity and inclusion. Today, we are asking the nation to commemorate the contributions to our liberty and to remember together the friends, allies, and Commonwealth nations who joined Britain in defending its freedoms, values, and way of life. In the spirit of this year's diversity theme, our remembrance, which upholds equality and inclusiveness, recognises the value of every life. If we consider A.J.'s work from the Humanist Outlook, it is he who said, "The only possibility for a sound basis of morality is mutual tolerance and respect. Respect for others' customs, respect for their opinions, respect for their rights and feelings, and awareness of everyone's needs." Therefore, to ensure we promote diversity and inclusion, today's remembrance ceremony will incorporate a number of elements which collectively ensures we recognise the value of every life. The first element will begin with recalling. In this, we will recall a diverse range of personal stories from theatres of war that the UK has been engaged in. And within each of these stories, we will recall past sacrifices, valour, and tragedy. Through the recalling of these stories, we will incorporate the second element of today's ceremony, which is relive. We will relive the emotions of our departed and try to comprehend the challenges they faced. After recalling and reliving, we will then recite the verse of remembrance, and the last post will sound. This will be followed by a minute's silence. We will then move on to reconciling. This is where we reconcile our feelings about the toll of war, and through this we gain a greater understanding of the effect war has. Then we move on to rededication. This is where we take the time to acknowledge and pay tribute to all of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice in all times of war. Then we will end today's ceremony with hope for the future. Here we take time to think about tomorrow. We think about how we are to teach our successors what we remembered, in the hope that when their day comes, they will have more power to prevent the tragedy of war and loss of life. But first we begin with the Humanists UK reflection on remembrance.
Remembrance Day is an opportunity for all of us to remember those who have lost their lives in conflict, making such an extraordinary sacrifice, believing that the lives of those who live on would be better, that the world would be a better place. It's a time for us to think deeply about the impact of war on individuals, on families, communities and countries. Humanists UK are proud to represent non-religious armed forces personnel at remembrance ceremonies across the UK to pay our respects to those whose lives have been lost or forever changed in war and conflict. For just over a century, the focus of the national ceremony has been the cenotaph in London. It was set up after the First World War, a war that unveiled the terrible cruelty and barbarism that humans could be capable of. The armistice had been signed on the 11th of November 2018, and the peace treaty with Germany was signed in June the following year. And then on the 19th of July 1919, the country celebrated Peace Day. Beacons were lit on summits, and in London, thousands gathered to take part in a parade. The procession ended in Whitehall with the laying of wreaths at the foot of a temporary monument to the fallen, designed by the architect Sir Edwin Lutyens. This wood and plaster cenotaph was replaced with a permanent version in Portland stone the following year. In Britain, it's of course easy to focus on remembrance from a purely British point of view, but it's very important to place remembrance in a global context, because so many countries were pulled into the violence, so many families were devastated by that conflict. And actually, even if we do just focus on Britain for a moment, we must remember all of those who fought alongside British forces in the First World War. The Australian and New Zealand Armed Forces, the Indian Army, the West Indies Regiment, the South African Overseas Expeditionary Force, armed forces from Newfoundland, and closer to home, thousands of Irishmen who joined the British forces. The tragedy of the First World War, though, was felt all over the world, and regardless of nationality, age, service, gender, colour, race or religion. Its impacts were felt by armed forces personnel, by civil servants, by those in the emergency services, and of course innocent civilians, families, and even animals. Within Britain, there's a need for a national ceremony to be inclusive. Around a third of defence personnel identify as non-religious. And so since 2018, Humanists UK has been invited to take part in the National Service of Remembrance at the Cenotaph in Westminster, where we're pleased to be able to represent those with a non-religious worldview. The Cenotaph itself stands a century on as a permanent memorial to the fallen, but also as a permanent reminder of the atrocities of war, the terrible toll it exerts. Because remembrance is not about glorifying war, it is against glorification. And this act of remembrance that was instated at the end of the First World War now embraces all those affected by subsequent conflicts as well. We now pay tribute to everyone whose lives were lost or deeply affected by a century of conflicts.
Now we begin by recalling and reliving the first personal account from the time of the Crimean War. The 1853 Crimean War came about because France, Russia and Britain were all competing for influence in the Middle East, particularly with Turkey. It lasted 18 months, and in that time had escalated into a series of fragmental battle and sieges, causing huge loss of life and highlighting wider issues and failures pertaining to leadership, military intervention, mortality rates, medicine and mismanagement. The coverage of the war in newspapers, particularly in Britain, allowed the general public to experience the horrors of war in a new and provocative way. The reporting, combined with information from significant figures, promoted stories into folklore, such as that of Florence Nightingale and the charge of the Light Brigade. It is in this era that we relive the first account about the humanitarian Mary Seacole. This will be read by Humanists UK Vice Chair of the Board, Anne O'Connell.
Mary Jane Grant was born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1805. Her father was a Scottish soldier and her mother was a practitioner of traditional Jamaican medicine. Mary learned her nursing skills from her mother, who kept a boarding house for invalid soldiers. Although technically free, being of mixed race, Mary and her family had few civil rights. They could not vote, hold public office, or enter the professions. She therefore became a doctress who practiced Creole or Afro-Caribbean medicine, having learnt nursing and herbalism from her mother. In September 1854, Mary heard about the Crimean campaign and she was struck with the thought of looking after the troops she had known in Jamaica. She felt it was her duty to help and made the decision to travel to London to gain employment as a nurse and deploy to Crimea. On arrival, she made applications to the War Office, the Army Medical Department and the Secretary of War to be allowed to go and tend to the sick and wounded. She pointed out that she had extensive experience, excellent references, and knew many of the soldiers and regiments, having nursed them while they were stationed in Jamaica. But she was turned away by everybody, including one of Florence Nightingale's assistants. Undaunted, a distant relative of hers called Day was going to Balaclava on business, and they agreed to launch a firm called Seacole & Day, which would be a general store and hotel near the British camp in the Crimea. So, at the age of 50, with her large stock of medicines, Mary went to the battle zone. The moment she arrived in Balaclava, there were sick and wounded to attend to. She opened her British hotel in the summer of 1855 near the besieged city of Sevastopol to provide a mess table and comfortable quarters for sick and convalescent officers. Miss Nightingale's famous military hospital was situated hundreds of miles from the front line in Scutari, now called Üsküdar, just outside the Turkish city of Istanbul. But Mary's hotel was much closer to the fighting. Mary was able to visit the battlefield, often on the front line and frequently under fire, to nurse the wounded. Though some of the army doctors, despite her saving them a lot of work, regarded her as a quack, others were less bigoted. The assistant surgeon of the 90th Light Infantry watched with admiration as she, numb with cold, would administer to the soldiers, giving them tea and food and words of comfort. Indeed, she nursed sick soldiers so kindly that they called her Mother Seacole. As a role model, Mary Seacole is a great example. Her values of good citizenship, she always wanted to help the sick and wounded, entrepreneurship, her drive took her to the Crimea on her own steam, and achievement, she remains one of history's greatest figures, hold true today. They are values which are an inspiration to all of us.
We will remember them. Now we begin by recalling and reliving the second personal account, and this one is from the time of World War I. Known as the Great War, it lasted from the 20th of July 1914 to 11th of November 1918. It led to the mobilisation of more than 70 million military personnel, including 60 million Europeans, making it the largest war in history at that time. Additionally, as Neil Heyman in World War I wrote, not physically hurt, but scarred nonetheless, were 5 million widowed women, 9 million orphan children, and 10 million individuals torn from their homes to become refugees. It is in this era that we relive the second account, which is about Captain Haraji Kurseji, read by Jim Al-Khalili, Vice President of Humanists UK.
Born in Mumbai, then Bombay, to a prominent Parsi family from India, Hiraji Kuseji initially aspired to a cavalry commission in the British Indian Army due to his fondness for riding, but ultimately opted for the Indian Medical Service. He became a medical officer attached to the 14th King George's own Firozipur Sikhs during the Mesopotamian campaign in World War I. On 23rd of October 1918, an Anglo-Indian force that included Kuseji left Baghdad under the command of General Sir Alexander Cobb. The following day they reached the Little Zab River, where the Turkish 6th Army was deployed. Its commander, Ismail Haki Bey, fearing his rear was about to be overrun, began withdrawing towards Sharkat to the north. The British caught up with the Turks just south of Mushak during the evening of the 25th of October. On one part of the front, the 1st Highland Light Infantry attacked, but met stiff Turkish resistance. During the night, the 14th Sikhs were ordered to move up on their right and carry out a supporting attack at dawn. This was met with heavy machine gun and artillery fire. The Sikhs suffered, 67 killed and over 250 wounded. During the next 2 days, Kuseji and his fellow medics worked constantly, under fire, and had to tend and evacuate the casualties of both the 14th Sikhs and the 1st Highland Light Infantry. As the Turkish withdrawal continued, Cobb attacked again on the 29th of October at Sharkat. Both the 1st Highland Light Infantry and the 14th Sikhs advanced as part of the 51st Brigade, but the neighbouring 34th Brigade was held up and the attack stalled. During this period of fighting, Kuseji again regularly treated the wounded under fire. Throughout the operations, Captain Kuseji displayed the greatest zeal and disregard for danger while tending the wounded under heavy fire, working unceasingly for 48 hours, and was even himself severely wounded. Kuseji was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, the British military decoration recognising meritorious and distinguished service by officers. His citation in the London Gazette of the 26th of May 1919 stated, "For conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty at Mushak on the 25th to 27th of October and at Sharkat on the 29th of October."
We will remember them. Now we begin by recalling and reliving the third personal account, and this one is from the time of World War II. World War II was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. It was the deadliest conflict in human history, marked by 70 to 85 million fatalities, most of whom were civilians in the Soviet Union and China. It included massacres, the genocide, Holocaust, strategic bombing, premeditated death from starvation and disease, and the only use of nuclear weapons in war. It is in this era that we relive the third account, which is about Lieutenant Nagrami, read by Humanists UK trustee Emma Shepherd.
The 28th Maori Battalion was an infantry battalion of the New Zealand Army that served during the Second World War. It was formed after Maori MPs and organisations put pressure on the Labour government to raise a full Maori unit for service overseas. Maori wanted the formation of a distinct military unit to raise their profile and to serve alongside their Pakeha compatriots as subjects of the British Empire. During the action at the Tobago Gap in Tunisia in March 1943, 2nd Lieutenant Narimu commanded a platoon in an attack on a hill known as Point 209 that was strongly held by the enemy. The Ngati Porou soldiers called it Higurangi after their mountain at home. Narimu's first task was to take the high ground in front of the summit. He led his men with great determination straight up the face of the hill, which was defended by intense mortar and machine gun fire. With absolute courage and strong leadership, Narimu was first on the hill crest, personally annihilating at least 2 enemy machine gun posts. In the face of such a determined attack, the enemy fled. After capturing the crest, the men repelled a number of fierce counterattacks during the night. Second Lieutenant Narimu ordered his men to stand to and engage the enemy man to man. Narimu led the defence, driving the attackers back by shooting some with his machine gun and throwing stones in hand-to-hand combat when weapons were disabled and grenades had run out. He was wounded twice, by rifle fire in the shoulder and by shrapnel in the leg. Although his company and battalion commanders urged him to go out, he refused to do so, saying that he would stay a little while with his men. Darkness found Narimu and his depleted platoon lying on the rock face of the forward slope of the hill, the enemy on the reverse slope about 20 yards away. Throughout the night, the enemy repeatedly launched fierce attacks, but each attack was beaten off by Narimu's inspired leadership. He was still in possession of the hill by morning, but only he and 2 unwounded other ranks remained. On the morning of the 27th of March, 1943, the enemy again counterattacked, and 2nd Lieutenant Narimu was killed. He died on his feet, defiantly facing the enemy, with his Tommy gun at his hip.
To relive the sacrifices made by the Maori and all our Anzac cousins, we now have a song performed by the Humanist choir, which has its traditional roots in New Zealand. It is a love song about a courtship, widely accepted as being a love song written by a homesick Maori soldier from the trenches of World War I. Written to a sweetheart back in New Zealand, who longed for his return to be reunited with her true love. Kia kaha is a Maori phrase used by both the Maori and the Paka people of New Zealand, meaning stay strong. This phrase has significant meaning to both the Maori and Paka people, popularised through its use by the 28th Maori Battalion during World War II, when facing difficult and stressful times on the front line. We will remember them. Now we recall and relive the fourth personal account, and this is the one from the time of the Falklands War. The Falklands War occurred from April to October 1982 between Argentina and United Kingdom over the British dependent territories in South Atlantic. The Falkland Islands and its territorial dependency, South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. In total, 907 were killed during the 74 days of conflict. Argentina suffered 649 military, while 237 British service persons and 3 female Falkland Island civilians were killed. It is in this era that we relive the fourth account, which is about Navy medic Surgeon Captain Rick Jolly, read by Defence Humanists Network Chair Lieutenant Commander Charlie Jones.
As a young medical officer attached to 4-2 Commando, he took over the Royal Marine Medical Squadron in 1980. By 1982, Jolly was the senior medical officer of 3 Commando Brigade, which was a force of around 5,500 Royal Marines. It was then that the Falklands War broke out and 3 Commando Brigade was mobilised. On arrival at the Falklands, Rick was directed, with only 90 minutes' notice, to set up a field hospital in a derelict meat processing plant at Ajax Bay. Over the next 3 weeks, the red and green Life Machine performed more than 200 operations on the wounded and sick that needed urgent medical attention. On the 21st of May, the frigate Argonaut had been struck and was on fire, as well as having lost all power. Jolly set out in a Wessex helicopter, and en route 3 survivors from the frigate were spotted in the freezing cold sea, 1 in danger of drowning. Despite not wearing an immersion suit, Jolly insisted on being winched down to rescue them from the water. Later that day, back in the field hospital, Rick continued to demonstrate exemplary behaviour when 3 young Argentinian conscripts were brought into the trauma unit. Recognising the threat to their lives from their injuries, Jolly personally piloted a helicopter in order to fly 3 Argentinians to the Canberra for immediate surgical treatment. Like many of their comrades in the weeks ahead, they had expected to be tortured and found it difficult to accept that they were being cared for by Jolly and his team with the same dedication that was shown towards the British. In all, over 650 combat casualties from both sides passed through their hands, of whom only 3 died of wounds. Throughout the whole war, Jolly never brooked any inter-service nonsense, making it clear that their potential customers didn't care who treated them and that everyone, including him, had sworn to uphold the Hippocratic Oath. Jolly retired from the Navy in 1996, having been awarded an OBE in recognition of his dedication to the value of everyday life. In 1999, Jolly returned to the South Atlantic, to Buenos Aires, where he stood in front of more than 50 Argentinian veterans, some of whom he had personally treated, to receive the Orden de Mayo, one of the country's highest honours. Interviewed a few years after, Rick said, "Our attitude was simple, to treat the injured Argentinians in a way we would like to be treated." Before the Battle of Trafalgar, Nelson wrote a prayer in his cabin, saying, "May humanity after victory be the predominant feature in the British fleet." As a naval officer, those words meant a lot to me, so looking after the enemy's wounded, as though they were your own, was instinctive.
We will remember them. Now we recall and relive the 5th personal account, and this one is from the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan. Op Herrick was a British operation in Afghanistan conducted from 2002 to the end of combat operations in 2014. It consisted of the British contribution to the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, and support to the American-led operation Operation Enduring Freedom. Since 2015, over 1,000 British service persons remain in Afghanistan under the operation name of OPTORL. Between 2001 and 2020, 457 British military personnel have died in operations in Afghanistan. It is in this era that we relive the fifth account, which is about Afghan police officer Lieutenant Islam Bibi, read by Humanists UK Chair Tamar.
Hi, I'm Tamar, Chair of Humanists UK. I was personally really moved by the story of Lieutenant Islam Bibi, who was born in the same year as I was in 1974 and died in 2013 before she'd even turned 40. I've worked in and with NGOs in Afghanistan for many years and have heard firsthand from women in health, education and public service who face incredible challenges, including discrimination. Lieutenant Islam Bibi's story is a sad and poignant example of the struggles that these women face in Afghanistan and other countries, but also of the courage and determination that they show in entering and excelling in this kind of context. This 38-year-old mother of three had been a role model for other women in a province where few women are even seen on the streets, and then only wearing a burqa. Like her 32 other female colleagues, which is less than 0.5% of the province's 7,000-strong police force, she faced a daily battle not just against extremists and opium smugglers, but also against her own family. In an interview before her death, she said, "My brother, father and sisters were all against me. In fact, my brother tried to kill me 3 times. He came to see me, brandishing his pistol, trying to order me not to do it, though he didn't actually open fire. The government eventually had to take his pistol away." Lieutenant Bibi was born in the Kunduz province of Afghanistan in 1974 and was a refugee in Iran when the Taliban overran Afghanistan in the 1990s. She returned in 2001, raising her family at home before joining the police force in 2003. She quickly moved to the position of second lieutenant, reporting directly to CID leadership, which was an extraordinary achievement. She was the highest-ranking policewoman at that time and received many death threats as a consequence. She led one of the largest police female squadrons in Afghanistan that pursued the Taliban, searching for costume suicide bombers in burqas. Policewomen like Islam play an essential role in the war against insurgents in Afghanistan. In a culture that is marked by a strict separation of the sexes, the security forces like the Afghan army and NATO need women to perform special tasks, like the searching of women and of homes. Lieutenant Bibi's team were often the first to break into any house during a search in women's areas where male police officers are not allowed, since Afghans are deeply offended when male soldiers or police enter premises where women are present. Additionally, at roadside checkpoints, men cannot search women for concealed weapons and other contraband, however the women can. The fate of Lieutenant Islam Bibi illustrates the intricacies of gender issues in law enforcement in Afghanistan. Even today, female Afghan police officers have to leave their homes, hidden by a burqa, to don a police uniform and weapon at the police station in order to do their job.
We will remember them. Now we recall and relive the final personal account, which is about one of our hidden heroes. I use the term hidden in reference to the LGBT community because it was only recently, on the 12th of January in 2000, that Tony Blair's Labour government announced an immediate lifting of the ban for lesbian, gay and bisexual personnel, and introduced a new code of conduct for personal relationships. Up to this point, the Minister of Defence's long-held position had been that LGBT personnel had a negative impact on morale and cohesion of a unit and damaged operational effectiveness. Consequently, service personnel were automatically dismissed if it was discovered that they were LGBT, even though homosexuality had been decriminalised in the UK for civilians above the age of 21 over 23 years before then, in 1967. Therefore, because over 5 million men served in the British Armed Forces during World War II, of these, it is likely that at least 250,000 were gay or bisexual, based on projections from the 1990 to 1991 National Survey of Sexual Attitude and Lifestyles, which found that 6% of men report having had homosexual experiences. Dr. Hutton, Chair of Defence Humanists, will recall the personal story of Wing Commander Gleed.
Today, we remember one of the most daring and courageous members of the LGBT+ community, RAF fighter ace Ian Gleed. Gleed joined the RAF at the age of 20, completed his Wings course on Christmas Day 1936 and promoted to flying officer in 1938. In February 1940, the Spitfire Gleed was flying broke up in the air. The injuries he sustained meant a 3-week stay in hospital and a fight to regain his flying status. Joining 87 Squadron in May 1940, Gleed flew Hurricanes in the Battle of France. In Norman Frank's biography, Gleed's colleague Roland Beaumont described the impact he made. Gleed was one of our replacement pilots, and he came out from the UK to tell us exactly how to run the war, all 5 foot 6 inches of him. He was immediately as good as his word and tore into the enemy on every conceivable occasion with apparent delight and entire lack of concern. Gleed's first victories came a few days later when he claimed 2 Messerschmitt 110s destroyed. The following day, he claimed a further 4 aircraft destroyed and a probable. 2 remarkable days, and the basis of the claim that Gleed was the RAF pilot to make ace in the quickest time. In the summer of 1940, Gleed flew with 87 Squadron in the Battle of Britain. As the Luftwaffe shifted from daylight to nighttime bombing, 87 Squadron operated at night over Bristol. In September 1940, Gleed was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, and in December of that year was promoted to Squadron Leader, taking command of 87 Squadron at RAF Charmy Down. In November 1941, at the age of 25, Gleed was promoted to Wing Commander and appointed Wing Leader at RAF Middle Wallop and later RAF Ibsley, where he directed the operations of 118, 234 and 501 squadrons, conducting fighter sweeps across the English Channel and bomber escorts.
Awarded the Distinguished Service Order in May 1942, Ian Gleed was subsequently posted to HQ Fighter Command at RAF Bentley Priory. He didn't much enjoy sitting behind a desk, however, and arranged to be posted to an operational command in the Middle East, where he arrived in January 1943, taking command of 244 Wing. Gleed insisted that less experienced pilots should fly the newer, faster Spitfire 9, flying a lower performing Spitfire 5B himself. On 16th April 1943, he was shot down and killed over Tunisia. He had claimed his final aerial victory on 17th March, giving a final score of 13 destroyed, including 2 at night, 7 probables, 4 damaged, 1 destroyed on the ground and 1 damaged on the ground. Ian Gleed is interred at the Enfidaville War Cemetery in Tunisia, a long way from his birthplace in Finchley, North London. Gleed was also awarded the Belgian and French Croix de Guerre. He was described by a colleague as a pocket-sized man with care for others and courage beyond compare. His DSO citation stated, "He has always displayed a fine fighting spirit which, combined with his masterly leadership and keenness, has set an inspiring example." Ian Gleed was gay, but in those days he could not be open about his sexuality because gay servicemen and women risked being court-martialed or even prosecuted. In his wartime memoir, A Rise to Conquer, Gleed even invented a fictional fiancée named Pam. It was not until the 1990s, when his wartime lover Christopher Gotch gave an interview for a BBC documentary on LGBT+ history, that the truth was revealed and made public. Gay and lesbian citizens have been able to serve openly in Britain's armed forces since the year 2000, some 57 years after Wing Commander Ian Bleed's death on active service.
Sirs, ma'ams, ladies and gents, now is that part of the ceremony, which is the last post. Here we will have the verses of remembrance, followed by the last post, a minute's silence, and then reveille.
In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of the summer, we will remember them.
In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of the winter, we remember them.
In the rustling of the leaves and the beauty of the autumn, we remember them.
When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them.
When we have joys that we yearn to share, we remember them.
So as long as we live, they too shall live, for we remember them.
Now we move on to the reconciliation element of today's ceremony, read by Humanists UK patron Dan Snow.
Hi everybody, I've been asked to talk a little bit about reconciliation, which I think is a key element of this Remembrance Week, these Remembrance commemorations. I think reconciliation is about finding peace. We need to find peace. And you don't make peace with your friends. You make peace with your enemies. You make peace with things that have caused you enormous distress and hardship, possibly even been the focus of hate. And with those things, we need to reconcile. The most special thing about my job is getting to meet the veterans. They're veterans of war, they're combat veterans, but they're also people who have lived through unimaginable trauma, trauma of conflict as civilians or even of genocide. And the ones that stand out most to me are the ones who manage to reconcile. They've reconciled. First of all, it's remarkable. They're able to find some tranquility after what they've been through, occasionally even forgive the perpetrators of their trauma, but also reach a sense of understanding and a sense of equilibrium. And when I meet those people, I think they're actually, they do that. If they forgive, if they reconcile, of course they're doing it for the general good. They're doing it to lessen the source of friction in our world, but they're doing it for themselves as well, because I think to live with that anger, to live with that enmity is corrosive, is toxic for ourselves, individuals. I met a woman, Beth, once in the Congo. Her entire family was hacked to death in front of her in Rwanda. During the genocide, she was held in captivity with all that entailed by the people that had murdered her family. I've met Holocaust survivors. Some have the tattoos on their forearm that they were given in Auschwitz. I met Harry Patch. I'd like to meet Harry Patch, the so-called last Tommy. I met him deep into his 11th decade. And I met Dr. Bill Franklin, likewise, in his 11th decade. He sadly just passed away this year, who watched as Japanese bayoneted his patients after the fall of Singapore in 1941. And what's so striking about every single one of those people, every single one of those examples, they had found peace. They'd found peace. They had forgiven, and they had almost, for me, embodied that peace, the peace that we have to strive towards. The past can be so traumatic that we wish we could change it. We spend all our time wishing we can change the past, but we can't. We can't change what happened in Nazi Germany, in Rwanda, in the Congo more recently, during British rule in India, or during the appalling partition at the end of British rule in India. And reconciling, I think, means acceptance. Acceptance. It means moving on. And I think all of those people I mentioned have stopped trying to change their past. They've stopped trying to wish for a different story for themselves. And they've reconciled themselves with what's happened to them. I took a memorable trip once with Victor Gregg. He is a real character. He was a rifleman in North Africa, Italy, and then jumped in as a para to Arnhem. He was captured at Arnhem, and then he was held as a prisoner of war in Dresden. And he was there when the Allies destroyed Dresden in the infamous bombing of 1945. And we went back to Dresden when he was 99 years old. And I was a witness as he was united with a fellow sufferer, a fellow survivor of the Dresden bombing, a younger German woman. She was in her 80s now, but she was a child at the time. And I just watched as they shared such an intense moment of honesty and remembrance and reconciliation. Even though they couldn't speak to each other in their native languages, they sat there holding each other's hands, shaking with emotion. And it was the most extraordinary thing that anyone who was there has ever witnessed. And he tells me now, whenever I see him, I sort of check in with him every so often. And he talks about the reconciliation that he feels that he achieved at that moment. And he achieved the reconciliation with the horrors of his past, his own past, but a reconciliation with what he feels his country did. He's angry at the RAF, he's angry at Churchill, Britain, for ordering that raid. And it enables him to live a clearer life. And he says, for example, he sleeps far more easily than he did for decades before that trip. Harry Patch, who again I was lucky enough to meet, he tells a story that he tell everyone, wonderful story. You've probably seen him tell it on telly. He went back to where he served outside Ypres, where his best friend was killed as they went over the top at the Battle of Passchendaele. And he talks about remembering those on both sides of the lines, on both Germans as well as Brits. He always placed poppies on German graves whenever he went to those cemeteries. And he went back and met a German veteran once when he was deep into his hundreds. And he was, I think, Germany's last surviving veteran of the war at that point. And they shared a moment in this cemetery outside the Belgian town of Ypres. And I think true reconciliation, as embodied by Harry Patch, really involves a commitment to peace and understanding as well. I think once you've been through the often difficult process of reconciling with your past or with the actions of the forces that you served in, or with those actions of the enemy who you hated at the time perhaps, or were scared of at the time, it's easier to channel empathy in the present and future. I mean, I met some Israeli veterans of the Yom Kippur War, armoured veterans, who served up north against the Syrians, and they thought a lot about peace, obviously, and war, and they've thought about their erstwhile enemies very differently. I think perhaps though to those who haven't been on a similar journey, they've got a commitment and empathy that I think other people don't have. So that's all I really want to say, and I'm honoured to be asked to take part in this digital service. So thank you very much. But I do think that in this Remembrance Week, let's definitely remember, but let's not forget to reconcile. For our own benefit, for our own peace, but also that of our wider society and world.
Now we move on to the rededication element of today's ceremony. This will be read by Defence Humanists Network champion, Air Vice Marshal Richard Maddison.
It is now my role to lead the rededication of our commitment to remember. For many of us, remembrance is a deeply personal matter. We have our own thoughts of friends, loved ones and relatives that we've lost. Whereas for others, it is a matter of respect for those not directly known, who've made the greatest personal sacrifice. I've chosen to remember here at RAF Odiham in Hampshire, as it resonates with me more than any other location I know. Hampshire is, of course, one of those rare counties with Army, Navy and Royal Air Force bases within it, dating back for over 100 years. The squadrons based here share that history across the last century and remember the sacrifices made before them. Behind the battle honours on squadron standards are losses of enormous scale, such as the over 1,000 aircrew lost on 7 Squadron alone during World War II, while conducting over 5,000 bombing missions with heavy bombers, a reminder that war affects many people, including civilians. More recently, the Chinook behind me is one of many that have supported almost all our major operations in recent times, starting with the Falklands campaign in 1982, through the conflicts in the Balkans, Iraq and Afghanistan, and still today conducting operations in Mali alongside French forces, reminding us that we often fight alongside allies with many different faiths and beliefs. But for me, RAF Odiham is where I first flew my frontline aircraft in the Royal Air Force, and where I would return later as a station commander of the base during the latter stages of the British presence in southern Afghanistan. In the intervening years, I've lost friends and colleagues through accidents and hostile action, the names of which are engraved on the support helicopter memorial not far from where I stand. That memorial is a reminder to me not only of friends and colleagues lost, but also of the personal responsibilities of leaders to strive for peace, and of the courage and commitment we ask of others when it cannot be found. Let us remember those who died for their country in war and peace, those whom we knew and those whose memory we treasure, and all who lived and died in the service of their country and all people. I promise you, dear soldier, to remember what you've done, all the sacrifices you have made in battles lost and won. I promise you, dear soldier, that you will have not fought in vain, even when the years have come and gone, and only your tombstone does remain. I promise you, dear soldier, a poppy I will wear, to show the world I'm proud of you, and that I will always care. I promise you, dear soldier, to teach my children well, so that they will always remember, and to their children the stories tell. To you I make this promise, an oath straight from my heart, to never ever forget you, and that in my life you have a part. Lest that we forget the terror that is war, and all that has been given by those who fought before.
Underneath the stars you met me, underneath the stars you left me. I wonder if the stars regret me, at least you know you're all free. Oh, gently, go gently.
Underneath the stars you met me, underneath the stars you left me. I wonder if the stars regret me. I'm sure they'd like me if they only met me. They come and go of their own free will. Go gently, gently, go gently, gently, go gently.
Now we move on to the final element of today's ceremony, hope for the future. When we consider the topic of diversity and inclusion, a key aspect of today's global and multicultural world, we often feel the need to divide the world into those we believe are like us and those we perceive as being different to us. Existential thinkers term those different to us as the other. The other is that person that is not me, but a person that can be differentiated by aspects such as gender, skin colour, sexual orientation, belief and race. This other may intrigue and excite us, and we may wish to know more about them. However, contrastingly, their existence can have on us an uncomfortably close connection with creating a feeling of uncertainty. If they are not like me, how do I know what they will think? And an even scarier prospect for many people is, how do I know what they will do? However, recent events highlights to us that diversity remains an issue, and this can be because it engages with the unknown. And when doing so, we are faced with uncertainty. As Westbam points out in the book The End of Tolerance, we come into the world with deep gut fears. We fear the unknown, we fear the unfamiliar, and we can be hostile to whatever we fear. In other words, the very existence of someone outwardly unlike me leads to the fear of the unknown. We may apply these alienating terms to individual groups or even whole cultures. If we are to be leaders and to set the example, we have to take an existential view that by exploring the worldview of the other, we will not only learn something about the other, but also about ourselves. By reliving and recalling experiences of Mary, Haraj, Monamu, Rick, Islam, and Ian today, we learn about ourselves through learning about them. It is their deeds and deeds of many others that inspire us. It was their actions that help realign and reinforce our values. It was their humility and determination that humbles us. And in all of this, we acknowledge the debt that we owe them. We must therefore continue to contemplate, engage with, and reflect on the other. If we encounter otherness, such as diversity and inclusion, with an open, positive curiosity, the experience is likely to be a creative one, allowing us to develop new ways of thinking and doing things. I end the words with one more inspiring other. That is two-time Nobel Prize winner, Marie Curie. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less.